Think about everything you've ever been told about crime. The police will tell you, get rid of the boss, the crime goes away. The politicians will tell you, lock up the kingpin, the streets get safer, major drug lord arrested, city breathes easier. The war on crime turns the corner, and the people watching at home nod their heads. Makes sense, right? Cut off the head, the snake dies. Except it doesn't work like that. Not in Oakland, not in Washington, D.C., not in Philadelphia, not in Chicago. Because here is what they never put in the headline. Here is what nobody in power ever admits. The kingpin isn't just the problem. He is also the solution. He is the invisible hand that controls who sells where, who pays who does not get touched. He is the man keeping 20 hungry wolves from tearing each other apart, because everybody knows the consequences of stepping out of line. When that man is gone, the consequences die with him, and the wolves come out. Criminologists actually have a name for this. They call it the kingpin effect, the documented, studied, proven phenomenon where removing the man at the top causes violence to go up, not down. Today we are going to prove it. We've covered these stories on this channel separately. Felix Mitchell in Oakland, Rayful Edmond in D.C., the most dangerous neighborhoods where police stopped coming. But today, we are putting it all together, and we are starting with the biggest example in American history. A man who ran the largest street gang this country has ever seen. 30,000 soldiers, $100 million a year, 35 states, all from inside a prison cell. His name is Larry Hoover, and the day the government finally silenced him, Chicago never recovered. Chicago, 1969. A 19-year-old kid from Englewood named Larry Hoover sits down with his rival, David Barksdale, leader of the Black Disciples, two young men from the same broken neighborhoods, running the same broken streets, killing each other's people over corners that neither of them owned. They looked at each other and made a decision. Stop fighting each other. Start building something. They merged their organizations into the Black Gangster Disciple Nation. One structure, one chain of command, one set of rules. It was the most significant gang merger in American history. Hoover rose to the top. He called himself the chairman. And from that position, a teenager from Englewood, born in Mississippi and raised in Chicago, he began building something that law enforcement had never seen from a street organization. Infrastructure, not just corners, not just product, a hierarchy, a code of conduct, ranks, responsibilities, dues, a structure so organized that federal prosecutors would later compare it to a Fortune 500 company. At its peak, the Gangster Disciples had 30,000 members spread across 35 states. They generated an estimated $100 million a year. They had a board of directors. They had a political arm. Hoover called the gang Growth and Development, and they ran voter registration drives, organized community events, and operated free lunch programs for children. He was building a parallel government inside Chicago's black community, and he was doing all of it from a prison cell. In 1973, Larry Hoover was convicted of ordering the murder of a 19-year-old named William Pookie Young, a rival accused of stealing from the gang. He was sentenced to a term of 150 to 200 years in Illinois State Prison. The government thought that was the end. It was just the beginning. From Stateville Correctional Center, Hoover ran everything: phone calls, coded letters, visits from lieutenants who carried orders back to the streets. He built the Folk Nation from his cell, an alliance of gangs across Chicago united under his umbrella. The feds watched for 17 years, with wiretaps, undercover operations, and informants flipping and walking back into federal buildings with everything they knew. In 1995, Hoover was indicted on 40 federal counts: conspiracy, extortion, money laundering, and running a continuing criminal enterprise from inside prison. In 1997, he was found guilty on all charges and given 6 life terms. They moved him to ADX Florence, the federal supermax in Colorado, the most restrictive prison in the United States. There, he spent 23 hours a day in a concrete cell. The cell had a window that pointed only at the sky, so inmates cannot get their bearings on where they are. No contact, no communication. Concrete furniture. Complete isolation. The government had finally done it. They had silenced Larry Hoover, and Chicago, the city they thought they were saving, started dying. Here's what the professors and criminologists will tell you now, decades after Hoover's removal. The traditional gang structure of the Gangster Disciples and every organization connected to it radically fractured, decentralized, broke into horizontally organized cliques with no central leadership, factions operating independently, no chain of command, no code, no consequences for breaking the rules because there was nobody left to enforce them. When Hoover ran things, there was order inside the chaos, a hierarchy. You knew who was in charge, you knew the rules, you knew what happened if you broke them. When Hoover was silenced, 50 factions filled the vacuum simultaneously, each one claiming territory, none of them with the infrastructure to hold it, all of them armed, none of them willing to negotiate. The violence that followed wasn't a footnote, it was a generation. The chaos of Chicago's leaderless gang landscape in the first 2 decades of the 21st century became so well documented, so raw, so visible, that a teenager from Englewood named Keith Cozart picked up a microphone and put it on record. The world came to know him as Chief Keef, and the music he made, drill music, was the sound of a city without a king. Chaotic, leaderless, young men dying on corners that nobody controlled anymore, over beefs that nobody was big enough to settle. Drill music did not create Chicago's violence. It documented what happened after Larry Hoover was gone. Now, just this year, President Donald Trump commuted Hoover's federal sentence. He is 74 years old. He is still fighting his state conviction, and he is still in prison. His lawyers say he has suffered 3 heart attacks. They call his continued imprisonment a slow, state-sanctioned death sentence. And the city he built, the organization he ran for decades from a concrete cell, looks nothing like what he left behind. Because you can silence the king. You can put him in a box 23 hours a day with a window that only shows sky. But you cannot silence what happens to the city when the order he held together finally falls apart. That is the Kingpin paradox. And Larry Hoover is just where the story starts. We've covered these stories before on this channel, separately, one city at a time, but today we're putting them all together because the pattern is the same every single time. The king falls, the government celebrates, the city breaks. Oakland found out when Felix Mitchell was stabbed to death in Leavenworth in 1986. 8,000 people came to his funeral. The crime rate in East Oakland did not drop. It exploded. The most powerful man in the city's underground economy is gone. And in the 12 months that followed, 482 human beings were murdered in the nation's capital. Let's go back to those stories now, because once you understand the paradox, once you understand what Larry Hoover's removal did to Chicago, you'll never watch these stories the same way again. This is what happens when the king falls. August 29, 1986, Oakland, California. A horse-drawn glass carriage rolls through the streets of East Oakland. Inside, a bronze coffin worth $6,000. On top of the coffin, flowers arranged in the shape of a dollar sign. Behind the carriage, 14 Rolls-Royce limousines, white, gleaming, stretching back so far that witnesses could not see where the procession ended. 8,000 people line the streets. Ushers in tuxedos direct the crowd. Television cameras broadcast the scene internationally. Reporters scramble to describe what they are seeing because nobody has ever seen anything like this. Not for a mayor, not for a senator, not for a general, for a 31-year-old heroin dealer from the housing projects. In the crowd, Black Panther co-founder Huey P. Newton. Bay Area radio host Jimmy Guy watched the procession and later said that it was like Martin Luther King had died. The procession started at the San Antonio Villas, the housing projects where the dead man had grown up, and ended at Star Bethel Baptist Church in Emeryville. Civic leaders were furious, but proper permits had been filed. There was nothing anyone could do. His name was Felix Mitchell. They called him Felix the Cat. And what happened next would become one of the strangest phenomena in the history of American crime. Because the police thought putting Felix Mitchell in prison would save Oakland. Criminologists would later name an entire paradox after what happened instead. His arrest did not reduce crime. It did not save lives. It did not slow down the drug trade. It made everything worse. This is the story of the drug dealer whose funeral looked like a president had died and whose absence destroyed a city more than his presence ever did. Years later, at Felix Mitchell's federal trial, a prosecutor would stand before the jury and say something that captured everything about the man in a single sentence. A prosecutor told the jury that Mr. Mitchell was flashy and always wanted to be seen. That was the whole story. Felix Mitchell always wanted to be seen. In a neighborhood where nobody saw you. In a city that forgot you existed. In projects so broken that the buildings themselves would eventually be demolished. Erased from the map like they never happened. Felix Wayne Mitchell Jr. was born on August 23, 1954, in Oakland, California. He grew up in the 69th Avenue San Antonio Village housing projects, a cluster of low-rise buildings in East Oakland that residents called 69ville. The buildings were crumbling, the streets were cracked, jobs did not exist, opportunity did not exist. The city of Oakland put money into downtown and the hills. The flats, the projects, got nothing. Felix dropped out of high school. No diploma, no prospects, no way out that anyone could see, but Felix saw something. He looked at 69ville, this forgotten cluster of buildings that nobody cared about, and he saw a fortress. He saw a headquarters. He saw an empire. While still a teenager, Felix started organizing the kids around him, his friends, his neighbors, boys he had grown up with in the projects who had the same nothing he had. He called them My Other Brother. Think about that name. Not a gang name, not something designed to intimidate. My Other Brother, M.O.B., a family. That's how the 69 mob was born. And here is what made Felix different from every other kid selling drugs on a street corner in the 1970s in America. He did not think like a dealer. He thought like a CEO. Felix connected with a Los Angeles kingpin named Tootie Reese. Through Reese, he built supply lines connecting the Bay Area to Los Angeles and Detroit. He was not just selling heroin. He was building a distribution network with suppliers, middlemen, territory managers, and soldiers. Criminologists would later credit Felix Mitchell with creating the country's first large-scale, gang-controlled drug operation. Not the Crips, not the Bloods, not the gangster disciples. A dropout from the Oakland projects, he did it first. The 69 mob ran heroin through East Oakland like a corporation. They had structure. They had hierarchy. They had territory mapped out block by block. Felix sourced heroin from Mexican suppliers through his Los Angeles connections. The raw product came north, got cut in Oakland, and was distributed through a network that eventually spanned at least 8 states, including California, Arizona, and Texas, with outposts reaching into the Midwest. He created branded product, stamped packaging so customers knew they were getting 69 mob heroin. Brand recognition for drugs in the 1970s, before anyone else thought of it. And he innovated in ways that would change the drug game forever, in the worst possible way. He used children. Kids as young as 12 became delivery agents and lookouts. They could not be prosecuted as adults. They were invisible to the legal system, and they were loyal to Felix because he was the only person in their lives who ever gave them anything. The BET documentary about Felix's life would later describe it this way: his armed lieutenants and child lookouts helped to make Oakland an outlaw culture built by a teenager in a housing project. Here is the contradiction at the center of this entire story, and you need to hold this contradiction in your mind for everything that comes next. Felix Mitchell, the man who flooded Oakland with heroin, who turned children into drug runners, who would popularize drive-by shootings, also gave candy and toys to kids in the neighborhood. He donated money to charities. He sponsored youth athletic programs. He opened swimming pools in poor Oakland neighborhoods. He took busloads of children to Marine World. He distributed turkeys at Thanksgiving. He went to church. He was destroying the community with one hand and building it with the other. And the community loved him for it, because nobody else was doing anything at all. By the late 1970s, Felix Mitchell was untouchable. Picture the scene. It is a Saturday night in East Oakland in the late 1970s. The streets around 69ville are cracked and neglected. Buildings are falling apart. The city forgot these blocks existed a long time ago. And then a procession of European sports cars rolls through. At the center, Felix Mitchell, full-length fur coat, diamonds catching the streetlight, diamond-encrusted frames on his glasses, surrounded by lieutenants carrying assault rifles. Not concealed, not hidden, carrying them openly through the streets of Oakland like bodyguards for a head of state. Nobody called the police. Nobody complained. Because in 69ville, Felix Mitchell was the authority. Rapper Too Short would later say Felix Mitchell was like Oakland's leader, not its drug dealer, its leader. And he played the role perfectly. Estimates on how much money Felix was making varied wildly. $400,000 a week according to some, $800,000 a week according to others, $1 million a month, $5 million a year. The numbers depended on who was counting, the feds, the journalists, the people on the street. But everyone agreed on one thing. Felix Mitchell had more money than anyone in Oakland, and he did not hide it. He weaponized it. A different luxury car every day. Parties so lavish they became legends. Clothes that cost more than most families in 69ville earned in a year. He transformed himself from a housing project dropout into an Oakland folk hero, and he did it on purpose. Because Felix understood something that most drug dealers never figure out. Fear keeps people in line, but loyalty keeps them quiet. So he built loyalty. His nephew Darrell Reed was one of those kids. Reed would later write in his book Wait that he was drawn to his uncle's glamour, the thousands of dollars worth of jewelry, the clothes, the diamond-encrusted glasses frames, and the rides around town in exotic cars. Felix treated him like a son. He bought him expensive clothes. He showed him what power looked like. Darrell Reed had once dreamed of being a baseball player. He played shortstop and left field for the Allen Temple Little League team. He played point guard on a basketball team that won a championship at the Rainbow Recreation Center. But that dream didn't stand a chance. Not with Felix Mitchell as your uncle. Not with the diamond glasses and the fur coats and the Rolls Royces rolling through 69ville every night. Reed didn't know it yet, but he was watching a blueprint for his own destruction because Felix's empire had a problem. Other people wanted it. Felix Mitchell wasn't the only drug dealer in Oakland. His two biggest rivals were Harvey Wisenton, who ran a gang called Funktown USA, and Milton Moore, known as Mickey Mo, the leader of a crew called the Family. Moore's story alone would be a movie. Before he was a drug dealer, he was an R&B singer, a musician with actual talent who crossed over into the drug trade and built an organization powerful enough to challenge Felix's monopoly head-on. Think about that for a second. An R&B singer going to war with the most powerful drug lord on the West Coast. Moore's crew called themselves the Family, and they weren't afraid of Felix Mitchell. For years, the three organizations, the 69 Mob, the Family, and Funktown USA, circled each other. Tensions simmered, territory shifted, small acts of violence escalated into bigger ones. Everyone knew a full-scale war was coming. The only question was when. Then came August 1980, and the answer was now. In the first week of that month, 3 people connected to Mickey Moore's family gang were murdered. Vendisha Davis, Terry Hatter, Charles Dorsey. 3 bodies in a matter of days, but the worst was still coming. On August 6, 1980, Ricky the Rocket Walker, his 18-year-old brother, Roger Red Walker, and their sister-in-law, Sandy Adamson, disappeared. The next morning, a jogger found them on a grassy slope near Skyline Boulevard in a hilly section of an Oakland park called Colorado Trail. Red Walker, 18, and Sandy Adamson, 31, had plastic bags pulled over their heads. They died of asphyxiation, strangled. Ricky the Rocket Walker, 26, was found nearby with 2 bullet wounds to the back of his skull. Execution style. 3 people, 1 family, found on a hillside above Oakland like a message written in blood. 6 gangland murders in 1 week. The police called it Bloody August. Federal witnesses would later testify that members of Felix Mitchell's inner circle bragged about their involvement in the murders of the Walkers and Adamson. And Felix? Felix told an associate he had taken a trip to Los Angeles during the first week of August 1980. A convenient vacation, a perfect alibi. While his people were strangling victims and putting bullets in skulls on an Oakland hillside, Felix the Cat was in Los Angeles, far enough away to keep his hands clean. He also pioneered something else during these wars, something that would spread across America like a plague. Felix Mitchell popularized the drive-by shooting. Before Felix, gangland murders were personal. You got close. You looked your enemy in the eye. Felix turned killing into something you did from a moving car. Fast. Impersonal. Devastating. A car rolls up. Windows come down. Shots fired. The car drives away. The victim bleeds out on the sidewalk. No witnesses who will talk. No evidence left behind. It spread from Oakland to every city in America. And it started here, with Felix the Cat. Mickey Moore and the Family were eventually brought down in 1985, the same year Felix got arrested. The R&B singer who went to war with Oakland's drug king is now a preacher. By 1985, Felix Mitchell had been at the top for nearly a decade. He had survived Bloody August. He had outlasted rivals. He had built an empire that stretched across California and into the Midwest, spanning at least 8 states. But the bodies had piled too high. Local and federal law enforcement had been building a case for years. The FBI, the DEA, and Oakland Police Department were all watching. Wiretaps, informants, surveillance, In 1985, they finally got him. Felix Mitchell was arrested, tried, and convicted. The judge sentenced him to life in prison. He was sent to Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary, one of the most notorious prisons in America. Law enforcement celebrated. They had cut the head off the snake. Oakland's most dangerous drug lord was behind bars. The heroin trade would collapse. Violence would decrease. The city could breathe again. That is what they believed. They were catastrophically wrong. Here is the fact that makes Felix Mitchell's story unlike any other gangster story ever told. When police removed Felix Mitchell from Oakland, crime got worse. Not a little worse, catastrophically worse. The level and scope of crime increased. The volume of drugs on the streets of Oakland and other East Bay communities surged. Heroin did not become harder to find. It became cheaper, more accessible. More people got addicted. More people died. And the violence exploded. Without Felix Mitchell controlling the market, smaller gangs rushed to fill the vacuum. They did not have his discipline. They did not have his structure. They did not have his ability to keep things under control. What they had were guns and ambition, and no one to tell them no. Price wars broke out. Shooting wars followed. The streets of Oakland became more dangerous than they had ever been under Felix Mitchell's rule. Criminologists gave this phenomenon a name. They called it the Felix Mitchell paradox. The idea is this: Felix had such monopoly power over Oakland's drug market that he actually controlled the violence. He set prices, so there were no price wars. He policed the smaller gangs, so there were no turf wars. He was the ceiling and the floor. Remove him, and everything collapses. Think about what that means. While Felix ran Oakland, he set the price of heroin. One price, stable, no competition. If a smaller dealer tried to undercut him, Felix's people dealt with it. If a new gang tried to move into his territory, Felix's people dealt with that too. It was brutal. It was criminal. But it was controlled. Remove Felix, and suddenly there was no one setting the price. 20 small-time dealers flooded the same corners. They undercut each other. Heroin got cheaper. Cheaper heroin meant more customers. More customers meant more addicts. More addicts meant more desperation. More desperation meant more crime. And the turf wars. Without Felix keeping smaller gangs in check, everybody grabbed for territory. Every block became contested. Every corner became a battlefield. The police thought they were performing surgery, removing a tumor from the body of Oakland. Instead, they performed an amputation with no plan for what came after. It is the same principle economists use when studying monopolies. A single company controlling a market is bad, but shattering that monopoly without replacing it with something better creates chaos. The police did not save Oakland by removing Felix Mitchell, they broke it. His very absence was more dangerous than his presence had ever been. And here is what makes this more than just a story about one drug dealer. The Felix Mitchell paradox has been documented in cities across America. Take out the kingpin, and the kingdom does not fall. It fractures into 100 pieces, each one sharp enough to kill. Felix Mitchell did not live to see what happened to his city. On August 21, 1986, a little more than a year into his life sentence at Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary, another inmate stabbed Felix Mitchell to death. He was 31 years old. His 32nd birthday was 2 days away. 2 days! Think about that. A man builds an empire that generates millions. He controls an entire city's drug market. He has more money than he could ever spend. He has cars, diamonds, fur coats, power. Thousands of people would have done anything he asked. And he dies on a prison floor, stabbed by another inmate. in a federal penitentiary 1,000 miles from Oakland, 2 days before his birthday, with no one from 69 Ville there to help him. The man who created the country's first large-scale, gang-controlled drug operation died the way so many of his own victims had died. Violently, suddenly, with no warning and no escape. 8 days later came the funeral. The horse-drawn carriage, the 14 Rolls-Royces, the dollar-sign flowers, the 8,000 mourners, Huey P. Newton in the crowd, international television coverage, a city mourning a drug dealer like a king. In 1987, Felix Mitchell's criminal convictions were overturned by a federal judge on technicalities. It didn't matter. He was already dead. Felix Mitchell's story does not end with his funeral. It continues through his nephew. Darrell Lil D. Reed had grown up watching his uncle, the cars, the jewelry, the diamond-encrusted glasses, the power. Felix had treated him like a son. When Felix died, Reed was still in high school, but he was already moving thousands of dollars of crack cocaine a day. Reed rose fast, faster than anyone expected. By 20 years old, he was the most powerful drug dealer in the Bay Area. Not heroin this time, crack cocaine. The new drug had arrived in Oakland just as Felix's empire collapsed, and Reed rode the wave. He had the whole city, East Oakland, West Oakland, North Oakland. He was clearing $15,000 a day. He was buying exotic cars with brown paper bags full of cash. And he was still a teenager. Reed was so successful that in December 1988 he threw himself a 20th birthday party at the Golden Gate Fields Turf Club in Albany. He paid $30,000 for the event. 3,000 guests attended. MC Hammer, the Oakland rapper who was about to become the biggest artist in the world, performed. Reed got on stage and danced with him. 3,000 people watching a 20-year-old drug dealer dance with MC Hammer at a black tie party he threw for himself. Less than 2 weeks later, the DEA kicked in his door. They raided his Adams Point apartment in Oakland and seized 30 pounds of crack cocaine and 16 pounds of powder cocaine. Street value, $3 million. It was one of the largest drug seizures in Bay Area history. The most chilling detail was that an undercover officer had been holed up in an apartment directly above Reed's, listening to him cook cocaine. Reed was sentenced to 35 years in federal prison, first offense. And when Reed went away, the second Oakland drug war erupted. 2 of Reed's former lieutenants, Timothy "Timmy" Black Blewett and Anthony the Ant Flowers, turned on each other. Blewett was Reed's second in command. Flowers was his enforcer and hitman. 16 murders in less than 3 years. Felix Mitchell's empire had created a cycle that kept repeating. Build, control, get arrested, power vacuum, war, bodies, repeat. In 2016, 28 years after his arrest, President Barack Obama commuted Darrell Reed's sentence. The former crack king of Oakland walked free. He now runs a foundation in his name. He mentors at-risk youth. He tells his story as a warning. Reed wrote from prison, "To anybody who thinks that I lived a great life, it was not worth decades of my freedom." Felix Mitchell is immortalized in rap lyrics by Too Short and Yuckmouth. BET profiled him on American Gangster. The movie New Jack City was loosely inspired by his story. His name still echoes through Oakland decades after his death. But the thing that separates Felix Mitchell from every other drug lord who ever lived is that paradox. Every other gangster story ends the same way. The police catch the bad guy. Justice is served. The city is saved. Felix Mitchell's story proves that's a lie, because sometimes the system is so broken that removing the villain doesn't fix anything. it makes everything worse. The problem wasn't Felix Mitchell. The problem was a city so devastated by poverty, by neglect, by decades of disinvestment and institutional abandonment, that a heroin dealer from the housing projects became its most important leader, the only person investing in the community, even if those investments were poisoned. Take him away, and you don't get safety. You get chaos. Felix Mitchell gave candy to children and flooded their neighborhood with heroin. He donated to charities and popularized drive-by shootings. He went to church and ordered executions. He was the best thing and the worst thing that ever happened to 69 Ville. And that says more about America than it says about Felix Mitchell. His funeral procession, the horse-drawn carriage, the 14 Rolls Royces, the $6,000 bronze coffin topped with dollar-sign flowers, the 8,000 people lining the streets, wasn't just a drug dealer's send-off. It was Oakland screaming, "Look at us. Look at what we've been reduced to. Look at who we have to mourn." That's the Felix Mitchell paradox. And Oakland is still living with it. November 18th, 1986, 12:37 a.m., Chicago South Side. A black Cadillac limousine rolls down 79th Street. Back seat, a man in jogging clothes. No jewelry, no silk, no diamonds, just a portable telephone pressed to his ear. He says, "We are a block away. Get those lights on." He is calling ahead to his girlfriend's house, telling someone inside to turn on the floodlights. Because this man does not walk into the dark. Not anymore. Not after 30 years on these streets. The Cadillac stops in front of 7943 South Ellis Avenue. Two men are crouched between parked cars, one on each side of the street. They have been waiting. One has a 12-gauge pump shotgun. The other has a submachine gun. The moment the car stops, they pop up. The shotgun blasts through the windshield. Glass everywhere. Then the submachine gun opens up through the passenger window. Round after round after round. The driver, Ronald Johnson, dead, slumped over the wheel. The man in the back seat, dead, still holding the phone. His girlfriend, Diane Miller, dives to the floor. She survives. In the back of that limousine, wearing sweatpants and a red leather jacket instead of his famous silk suits, wearing no jewelry at all for the first time anyone could remember, lay Willie Flukey Stokes, the most powerful drug lord in Chicago history. He ran 40 dope houses, 300 soldiers, made $1 million a week. He had cops on the payroll and rivals in the ground, dead at 49. But here is what the headline does not tell you. The man who set up that hit, the man who told the shooters exactly where Flukey would be, exactly when he would arrive, and exactly which car he would be in. That man was the one person Flukey paid to keep him alive, his own bodyguard. And that is not even the craziest part of this story, because within 8 months of that phone call ending, 125 people would be executed across Chicago's South Side. Not by police, not by federal agents, by every faction, every gang, every crew that had been held in check by one man's name. The lid came off and Chicago burned. This is the story of the drug lord who held an entire city together by fear alone. The man who buried his son in a Cadillac. The man who threw million-dollar dice games in Las Vegas. The man who beat every murder charge they ever brought against him. And the night his bodyguard decided to become king, one bullet turned the South Side into a war zone. Before the diamonds, before the Cadillacs, before the silk suits and the million-dollar craps games. There was a kid on Chicago's South Side who understood one thing early. The rules do not apply if nobody can make you follow them. Willie Stokes, born 1937, South Side, Chicago. The kind of neighborhood where opportunity meant figuring out which hustle would not get you killed first. By the late 1950s, Stokes was already known to police. Small time, drug dealing, running scams, nothing that would make anyone pay attention. But Flukey was watching, studying. While other dealers got loud and got caught, Stokes noticed who lasted and who did not. The ones who survived were not the toughest. They were the smartest. The ones who understood that fear is more efficient than violence. Therefore, by the late 1970s, 2 decades of quiet work, Willie Flukey Stokes had become something Chicago had never seen before. Not a gang leader, not a lieutenant working for somebody bigger, an independent drug lord, operating completely outside the gang structure. In a city where the gangster disciples, the vice lords, the Black P. Stones carved up every block, Flukey answered to nobody. The DEA would later say he ran 20 to 40 dope houses across the South Side. Cocaine and heroin, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Each house pulling in $20,000 to $60,000 every single week. Do that math. 40 houses, $60,000 a week each. That's $2.4 million a week. Over $120 million a year moving through the South Side, and all of it running through one man. 200 people on his payroll at any given time. 300 soldiers ready to move at his word. And the police? The DEA said it plainly. Corrupt officials gave Stokes free rein to grow his empire. Cops didn't arrest him. They protected him. They warned him when raids were coming. They looked the other way when rivals turned up dead. Flukey didn't even need to touch the product. He ran everything from a desk, by telephone, coordinating deliveries, monitoring sales, dispatching punishment from a distance like a CEO running a corporation. A rival dealer said it years later. Flukey controlled every corner. Wasn't no freelancing or renegades who didn't pay Flukey his cut. But what made Flukey Stokes different from every drug lord before or after him wasn't the money, wasn't the soldiers, wasn't even the police protection. It was the style. Picture this man. Silk suits, custom tailored, a different color every day. His fingers weighted with diamond cluster rings as big as silver dollars. Both forearms covered in gold bracelets, a gem-encrusted watch on one wrist, a gold chain around his neck with a diamond-studded letter F hanging from it. 3 Cadillacs, vanity plates reading Flukey 1, Flukey 2, and Flukey 3. He would walk into a restaurant and the room would stop. Not because people were afraid, although they were. Because he looked like a movie, the kind of man who only exists in someone's imagination of what a gangster should be. And that was the point. His own lawyer, Joseph Ettinger, who represented him for over 20 years, said it. Flukey loved it. He wanted to succeed as a professional criminal. He used to go to gangster movies a lot, like Dillinger movies and stuff like that. He was modeling himself after the legends, but the legends never had what Flukey had, the audacity to rub everyone's face in it. Las Vegas, the craps tables. Flukey would blow through $1 million in a few weeks, giving away $100 bills to strangers standing near him because he thought they brought him luck. $1 million at a dice table in a few weeks. Then he'd fly home and make it back in a month. A detective once asked him why he lived like this. Why not lay low? His answer tells you everything about who this man was. He said, when you lost $1 million playing craps and you won $1 million, when you drove every car you wanted and ate in every restaurant, what else can you do except rub the authorities' nose in your criminal enterprise? That wasn't arrogance. That was a philosophy. Flukey believed correctly that the flashier he was, the more untouchable he became. Arresting a man that visible would expose every cop who had been looking the other way. The system protected him because the system was complicit. But the spectacle wasn't just for the streets. It wasn't just for the police, it was for his family. Because when the streets took something from Flukey Stokes, he made sure the world would never forget it. February 1984, Roberts Motel, Southside Chicago. The Roberts Motel was not just any motel, it was a sprawling complex, restaurant, lounge, nightclub, ballroom, and swimming pool. The epicenter of black culture on the South Side. Everyone passed through Roberts. Willie Stokes was 28 years old. He followed his father into the business. He had the same appetite for risk, the same love of flash, the same willingness to bet everything on a single moment. He was walking toward one of the motel's suites. He was performing a quality check on a heroin shipment he was negotiating. Standard business. He never made it inside. Gunmen were waiting on the steps. They opened fire. Willie the Wimp died on the steps of the Roberts Motel. He was 28 years old. He was shot down in the middle of the empire his father built. The streets took Flukey's son. Flukey then gave the streets something they had never seen before, something nobody had ever seen before. He had a coffin built, not a regular coffin, a custom-designed casket modeled after a 1984 Cadillac Seville. He took the coffin to a panel beater, a body shop, and had them install a genuine Cadillac front grille, a Cadillac trunk, working headlights that blinked, working taillights, a plastic windshield, a floral steering wheel, a dashboard, 4 wheels on the chassis, and a vanity license plate, WIMP. The cost was $7,000 for the coffin alone. Then he dressed his son in a hot pink 3-piece suit with a matching tie, a hat cocked to the side, and a giant diamond ring, the same kind Flukey wore, the same statement. And he propped Willie the Wimp up, not lying flat, sitting upright, hands on the steering wheel, $100 bills fanned between every finger, a dead man driving a Cadillac into eternity. Willie the Wimp's mother, Jean, said that she thought he would have really liked it because that's the way he was. He was flashy, and he believed in style. It made national news. Every newspaper, every TV station, the image burned itself into America's memory. But here is the part nobody talks about. That coffin wasn't just grief. It was a message to every rival, to every crew thinking they could push up because Flukey lost his son. The message was, I just spent more money burying my boy than you'll make in a year. I'm not hiding. I'm not running. I'm not weakened. I'm more dangerous because now I have nothing left to lose. And then a white blues guitarist from Texas read about it in the newspaper. He turned to his wife and said, this isn't a column, it's a song, 2 miles to the studio, song written on the drive. Bill Carter cut the track that afternoon. Stevie Ray Vaughan, one of the greatest guitarists who ever lived, heard it and recorded his own version, Willie the Wimp. It was released on the album Live Alive, and he played it in concert to thousands of fans around the world. A drug dealer's funeral turned into a blues standard by one of the greatest musicians in history. That had never happened before. It hasn't happened since. After his son's murder, Flukey didn't retreat. He escalated. January 1985, the Roberts Motel, the same motel where Willie the Wimp was killed. Flukey threw a party to celebrate his 30th wedding anniversary with his wife, Jean. The cost was $200,000. He hired the Staple Singers, the Chi-Lites, 2 legendary acts performing at a private party for a drug lord and his wife. On the dais next to the wedding party was a framed portrait of Willie the Wimp. At one point during the night, Flukey reached into his pockets and started throwing $50 and $100 bills into the crowd, just tossing money at people because he could. Because what else do you do when you've already buried your son in a Cadillac? Jet magazine covered it. The party was written up nationally, and the message was the same as the coffin. I'm still here. I'm still king, and I'm not afraid of any of you. But the audacity of it drove law enforcement insane. Cook County State's Attorney Richard M. Daley, future mayor of Chicago, said publicly that he had been a drug dealer for years, that he had destroyed lives in the community, and that just because he drove a big car and wore funny clothes did not make him a folk hero. But on 47th Street, that's exactly what he was. Flukey found homes for burned-out families. He reached into his pocket to keep mothers and their children from being evicted. He'd walk down the street, and teenagers would approach him, not to sell for him, not to beg, just to shake his hand. One young man at Flukey's funeral later said, "I was walking on the same street he was walking. I went up to him. I spoke to him. He spoke back. I introduced myself. He shook my hand and everything." That's the contradiction nobody could reconcile. The man flooding the South Side with cocaine and heroin, the man who controlled 66% of all drug sales, was also the man who made sure a single mother didn't sleep on the street. He was Robin Hood in silk. He was destruction wearing diamonds. And for 30 years, nobody, not the gangs, not the police, not the federal government, could touch him. But in the summer of 1986, Flukey walked out of a courtroom for the last time. Murder conspiracy charges dismissed. He grinned at reporters and asked, "Do I look like that?" 3 months later, he was dead. Earl Wilson, 33 years old, Flukey's personal bodyguard. His one job was to keep the king alive. Wilson knew everything: the routes, the schedules, the safe houses, the women, the phone calls. He knew which car Flukey would be in on any given night. He knew the pattern of how Flukey moved, from his wife's house to his girlfriend's house, from the movies to the convenience store, from the limousine to the front door. He knew that on the night of November 18th, 1986, Flukey would be coming from the movies. He knew Flukey would be in the limousine owned by his partner, Big Bill Hill. He knew Flukey would call ahead on his portable phone. He knew the car would stop on 79th Street outside Diane Miller's house. Wilson shared all of it. Prosecutors later established exactly what happened. Wilson was following Flukey in a separate car that night. While Flukey rode in the limousine, Wilson was on his own car phone, coordinating with a man named Elliot Taylor, feeding him real-time updates on Flukey's location. A voice was heard saying, "We are a block away." That phone call, the one Flukey made to have the floodlights turned on, was picked up by someone else too. An anonymous citizen with a police scanner heard it. Car phone conversations in 1986 were transmitted by radio waves, encrypted. Anyone with a scanner could hear them. The anonymous caller heard Wilson's conversations with Taylor, heard the coordination, heard the setup happening in real time. But nobody called the police, not fast enough. The Cadillac pulled up. Two men, crouched between parked cars on either side of the street, popped up. They fired a shotgun through the windshield and a submachine gun through the passenger window. Flukey and his driver were dead. Wilson, following behind in his car, fired a few shots in the direction of the fleeing gunman. It was a performance. His bullets went nowhere near them. He had set up the hit. Prosecutors said Wilson dreamed of crowning the next king of drugs on the South Side. He wanted the throne. Or at the very least, he wanted to be the man who decided who sat on it. The police caught on because of the anonymous scanner listener. Wilson was arrested, charged with 2 counts of murder. He was tried, convicted, and sentenced to life. In court, Wilson testified he only confessed because police intimidated him, showed him pictures of dead children, and told him his family would be in danger once Stokes's organization found out he was a suspect. The jury did not believe him. But here is the thing Wilson did not understand. It was the thing nobody on Chicago's South Side understood until it was too late. Flukey Stokes wasn't just a drug dealer, he was the structure. He was the reason every gang, every crew, every corner boy on the South Side operated within a system. Not because they liked him, because they feared him. His name kept order. His reputation kept the peace. When Wilson pulled the trigger, he did not just kill a man, he killed the system. Flukey's funeral was at a Arleek Funeral Home on 78th Street and South Cottage Grove Avenue. 7,000 people filed past his casket. Some say 10,000. Police arrested 10 people for disorderly conduct outside. Hawkers on the sidewalk sold Flukey t-shirts. Mothers lifted their children above the coffin so they could see him one last time. He was laid out in a mahogany coffin with a custom-designed powder blue interior. He wore tinted sunglasses, a blue suit, a blue silk shirt, a blue tie and handkerchief, and blue python shoes. And in his hand, a portable telephone, the same kind he was holding when he died. The DEA assistant special agent in charge of Chicago said it publicly. Chicago has lost one of its biggest sources of supply for cocaine and heroin, not one of its biggest criminals, one of its biggest sources. Even the feds acknowledged what he was. But nobody was prepared for what came next. Within 8 months of Flukey's murder, 125 gang-related executions swept Chicago's South Side. Masked gunmen with AK-47s, entire city blocks turned into battlegrounds, dawn to dusk, bodies dropping every day. Flukey's top lieutenants fought each other for control of the operation. His second in command, a man also called Flukey Taylor, seized control first, but he was challenged immediately by factions led by men named Black, Johnson, Williams, each one backed by different gangs, each one willing to kill to fill the vacuum. Charles Edward Bay, leader of the Black P. Stones and one of the most dangerous gang leaders in Chicago history, had been Flukey's rival for years. While Flukey lived, Bay could not touch the South Side drug trade. With Flukey gone, Bay moved immediately. He was arrested in connection with Flukey's murder, but never charged. Mexican traffickers, who had been shut out by Flukey's all-black operation, now pushed in, seeking direct connections with street gangs. The old system of one man controlling the supply was finished. In its place, chaos. 20 factions fighting over 40 dope houses. That is the number your headline promises. 125 people dead in 8 months because one bodyguard decided he wanted to be king. And the cruelest part? Wilson never got the throne. He was arrested before he could sit in the chair he'd emptied. Earl Wilson received life in prison. William Big Bill Hill, Flukey's partner and his right-hand man, was sentenced to 20 years in prison the day after Flukey's murder on unrelated drug charges. He showed up to court somber. The king was dead, and the kingdom was falling. Charles Edward Bay's story is its own nightmare. Arrested for multiple murders, convicted of none. In 1970, he went on trial for the ambush killing of a Chicago police officer and was acquitted. In 1987, he was arrested in connection with Flukey's murder and never charged. Bay eventually stood up in a church on Mother's Day in the late 1990s and publicly apologized for his life of violence. He was killed in 2010, gunned down in the same streets he'd terrorized for decades. The South Side drug trade fractured into 100 pieces. The old system, one kingpin, organized distribution, structured territory, died with Flukey. What replaced it was the crack era. Teenage gunslingers, no structure, no rules, no discipline. The kind of chaos that helped turn Chicago into the murder capital of America for the next 3 decades. Stevie Ray Vaughan, the guitar god who immortalized Willie the Wimp, died 4 years after Flukey in a helicopter crash in August 1990. He was 35. The song outlived them all. Willie the Wimp and his Cadillac coffin is still played on blues stations around the world, a monument to a 28-year-old drug dealer's funeral that nobody can forget. On the day he died, Willie Flukey Stokes was wearing blue sweatpants, powder blue undershorts, a red leather jacket over a blue t-shirt with the word Michigan written on it, white sneakers, brown socks, and a black cap. No diamonds, no gold bracelets, no silk, no gem-encrusted watch, no diamond F around his neck. The most flamboyant drug lord in Chicago history, the man who built his entire identity on spectacle, who buried his son in a Cadillac, who threw $200,000 parties, who blew $1 million on dice, died dressed like a man running to the corner store for milk. He had just come from watching Something Wild at the movies. He stopped to grab popcorn from a convenience store with his girlfriend. An ordinary Tuesday night. That's the thing about kings. They die on ordinary nights, walking ordinary streets, doing ordinary things. And then the streets remember what ordinary felt like before that king arrived. 125 people. 8 months. Because Flukey Stokes was the fear that kept the peace. And once that fear was gone, there was nothing holding any of it together. His lawyer said it, the police said it, the DEA said it, even his rivals said it. Without Flukey, Chicago had no structure, just corners, just guns, just teenagers who never learned the rules because there was nobody left to enforce them. He came from nothing, built an empire that made $1 million a week, ran it for 30 years, beat every charge they ever threw at him, buried his son in a Cadillac, had Stevie Ray Vaughan sing about his family, and the man he paid to protect him shot him in the back of a Cadillac at 12:37 in the morning. They sold Flukey t-shirts on the street the next day. There were 7,000 people at his funeral, 125 dead in the months that followed. That's the measure of a man, not how he lived, how the world fell apart when he was gone. In 1969, a 15-year-old kid sat in front of a review board at a juvenile detention center in Los Angeles. They asked him a simple question: "What do you plan to do when you get out?" His answer was being the leader of the biggest gang in the world. The board probably laughed. A 15-year-old car thief talking big behind a desk. Kids say things like that. 2 years later, that kid walked out of detention. 300 pounds of muscle with 22-inch biceps. He met another teenager on a high school campus. They shook hands. Within a decade, what those two boys started in a neighborhood in South Central Los Angeles spread to 42 states, grew to 50,000 members, and became one of the most violent organizations in American history. He did exactly what he told them he would do. His name was Stanley Williams. And what happened to him after that is something nobody, not the cops, not the gangs, not even Tukey himself, could have predicted. In 1969, at 15, Tukey was arrested in Inglewood for stealing a car and sent to Los Padrinos Juvenile Hall in Downey. Now here is the detail that changes this entire story. At Juvenile Hall, a gym coach introduced Tukey to Olympic weightlifting. It clicked immediately. By the time he was released in early 1971, the kid who had been a scrappy street fighter was now a physical monster. He would eventually bulk up to over 300 pounds with 22-inch biceps. This was not just a teenager anymore. The board probably thought he was being a tough kid talking big, but Tukey meant every word. Shortly after his release, a kid named Raymond Washington approached him at Washington Preparatory High School. Raymond ran gangs on the east side of South Central. He had heard about Tukey's reputation as a fighter, specifically that Tukey was willing to go up against bigger, more established gangs that other kids would not touch. What struck Tukey about Raymond was the way he dressed: leather jacket, starched Levi's jeans, suspenders. His whole crew looked the same, just like Tukey's crew on the west side. Raymond had a proposal: merge the east side and west side crews into one gang. Unite them with a third set from Compton led by a teenager named Mac Thomas. Create something bigger than any of them could build alone. Tukey said yes. They called it the Crips. About 30 members, most of them 17 years old. The name originally came from cribs, a reference to how young they were, but it was mispronounced so many times on the streets that it stuck as Crips. Tukey later wrote that the Crips weren't formed for any political purpose. No community agenda, no Black Panther ideology. In his own words, it depicted a fighting alliance against street gangs. Nothing more, nothing less. Just teenagers fighting for territory with their fists, wearing blue. That was 1971. The Crips didn't grow, they devoured. Tukey and Raymond went on a recruitment campaign across every black neighborhood in South Los Angeles that was unlike anything the city had seen. They didn't ask gangs to join. They challenged gang leaders to one-on-one fights. If you lose, your crew becomes a Crip set. If you refuse to fight, the Crips come anyway. Most gangs joined. The ones that didn't were terrified. And the ones that refused to be absorbed formed their own alliance to survive. The Bloods. That rivalry, Crips versus Bloods, would define Los Angeles for the next 50 years. It would spread across the entire country. It would become the most recognized gang war in American history. And it all started because two 17-year-olds decided to merge their crews. But here's what Tukey couldn't control. And this is the part of the story that nobody focuses on enough. Every new gang that joined the Crips kept its own leadership, its own territory, its own rules. There was no hierarchy, no chain of command, no structure. Each set operated independently. The Crips weren't an organization, they were a brand, and anyone who wore blue and called themselves a Crip was one, whether Tukey approved or not. By 1973, the original Crip leaders were disappearing. Curtis Buddha Morrow, Tukey's close friend, the man who first wore the blue bandana that became the Crips' signature, was shot dead on February 23rd over a petty argument. He was one of the founding members. Gone. Mac Thomas, the Compton leader, was murdered under mysterious circumstances in the mid-1970s. Gone. Raymond Washington was arrested in 1974 for robbery. He was sentenced to 5 years. Gone. By 1974, Tukey was the last original Crip leader still alive and free. He was 20 years old. He had become the de facto leader of something already too big for any one person to lead. De facto. Tukey later admitted what the Crips gave him and why he could not walk away. He said there were no black Rotary clubs out there. There were no cricket clubs. There was a void. The gang life filled that void, though negative as it was. It filled a void that nothing else could fill. Void. That void swallowed everything. Swallowed. By 1978, there were 45 Crip gangs in Los Angeles County and 20,000 members. They were not fighting with fists anymore. They were running the production and distribution of PCP, marijuana and amphetamines across the city. And they were killing each other. Killing. Crip sets did not just fight with the Bloods, they fought with other Crip sets. The thing Tukey built was eating itself. Other. In 1976, the Bloods shot Tukey in a drive-by while he sat on his porch in Compton. He could not walk for 2 years. The man who started the Crips was shot on his own front steps by the gang his creation had brought into existence. Shot. After the shooting, Tukey began smoking PCP heavily. His authority crumbled. New Crip leaders emerged who did not know him, did not respect him, and did not care about whatever the original purpose had been. Crumbled. Tukey said the Crips had become just like the gang members they had once sought to protect themselves from. Crips had become gangbangers who terrorized their own neighborhoods. Terrorized. The 15-year-old who told a review board he would lead the biggest gang in the world had done it. By 25, that gang was a machine running on its own fuel, and the machine did not need him anymore. Machine. It was about to destroy him. February 28, 1979. Prosecutors say Tukey and 3 associates smoked PCP-laced cigarettes and drove to an industrial area east of Los Angeles looking for somewhere to rob. They found a 7-Eleven in Whittier. Inside, Albert Owens, 26 years old, the only employee working that night. Tukey took Owens to a back room, shot out a security monitor, then executed Owens with 2 shotgun blasts to the back. He executed him. The robbery netted about $120. 11 days later, March 11, 1979, prosecutors say Tukey broke into the Brookhaven Motel in South Central on his own. Inside, he killed 3 members of a Taiwanese immigrant family who owned and operated the motel: Yen Yi Yang, 76, his wife Tsai Shai Chen Yang, 63, and their visiting daughter Yi Chen Lin, 43. 3 people were killed, 4 people dead in 11 days, a convenience store clerk and a family of immigrants. Witnesses at the trial said Tukey bragged about the killings afterward. Prosecutors presented testimony that he had imitated the sounds one of the victims made as they were dying and laughed about it for 5 or 6 minutes. Laughed. Tukey maintained his innocence for the rest of his life. He said the witnesses were facing their own charges and lied to the jury in exchange for deals. His defense argued that forensic evidence was unreliable. None of it mattered. In 1981, Tukey was convicted of all 4 murders and sentenced to death. He was sent to San Quentin on April 20th, 1981. He was 27 years old. 5 months before Tukey's arrest, on August 9th, 1979, Raymond Washington was standing on a street corner in South Central at East 64th Street and South San Pedro Street, hanging out with friends around 10 p.m. A car pulled up. People Raymond knew, people believed to be his own Crips associates. Someone opened fire. Raymond Washington, the man who proposed the Crips in the first place, who approached Tukey at Washington Prep, who wore the leather jacket and starched Levi's, was dead at 25. After getting out of prison, Raymond had been shocked by what the Crips had become. The fights were no longer fists, they were firearms. Sets were killing each other. The organization had totally broken down into loosely affiliated groups with no common leadership. Raymond tried to distance himself. He no longer held any influence, and the thing he'd created killed him for it. Both founders, one dead at 25, shot by his own people, one on death row at 27, and the Crips had never been stronger. Tukey did not go quietly into San Quentin. He arrived on death row and immediately became a problem. He assaulted guards. He assaulted inmates. On one occasion, prison officials learned he had ordered a hit on a fellow inmate from inside his cell, and the man was attacked and stabbed, but survived. For these and other offenses, Tukey was sent to solitary confinement, 6.5 years, alone, in a cell the size of a bathroom. And somewhere in that silence, something broke. Or maybe something finally grew. Tukey later said he looked in the mirror during those years alone and realized the truth about himself. That the reason he'd joined gang life was self-hatred. That growing up without a father, mimicking pimps and dealers, watching children fight for money, all of it had convinced him that destruction was power, that violence was identity, that black manhood meant being the most dangerous person in the room. He was wrong, and it took 6.5 years in a concrete box for him to see it. In 1994, after his release from solitary, Tukey was a different man. He started reading everything: reference books, philosophy, academic literature, anything he could get. He educated himself in ways the streets and the schools never had. He wrote later, "I am no longer diseducated. I am no longer part of the problem. Thanks to the Almighty, I am no longer sleepwalking through life." And then he started writing. In 1996, with the help of co-author Barbara Becknell, Tukey published the first of 8 children's books in the Tukey Speaks Out Against Gang Violence series. Titles included Gangs in Your Neighborhood, Gangs and Self-Esteem, and Gangs and Drugs. They were written for kids aged 11 to 14, the exact age Tukey had started carrying a switchblade. All the royalties went to nonprofit organizations, including Mothers Against Gang Violence. In 1997, he published a public apology for creating the Crips. He said he did not expect the Crips to end up ruining the lives of so many young people, especially young black men who have hurt other young black men. Then, in 1998, he wrote Life in Prison, a book that described the reality of incarceration. There was no glorification, no mythology, just the humiliation of strip searches, the terror of solitary, and a homesickness that never goes away. He urged young people to test themselves by spending 10 hours non-stop and alone in a bathroom to get a feel for what it is like to live in a prison cell. But the books were only the beginning. From his death row cell, Tukey recorded a video message that was shown to over 400 gang members, Crips and Bloods, in the same room. He helped create the 2004 Tukey Protocol for Peace, a ceasefire framework between the two gangs he had helped bring into existence. He supported the 1992 Watts Truce, and he contributed to the first ever Los Angeles Gang Summit. The man who started the war was trying to end it from a cage. In 2001, a Swiss parliament member named Mario Fair nominated Tukey for the Nobel Peace Prize. It was the first time a death row inmate had ever been nominated. The nomination said his books and anti-gang work had a demonstrable positive impact on children worldwide. He would be nominated 5 times for the Peace Prize and 4 times for the Nobel Prize in Literature. He was the only man in history to receive Nobel nominations while imprisoned. President George W. Bush sent him a letter, the Presidential Call to Service Award, commending his anti-gang work. Jamie Foxx starred in Redemption, the Stanley Williams story, in 2004. Snoop Dogg showed up to his clemency rallies and performed a song he had written for Tukey. The co-founder of the Crips, convicted of 4 murders, was being discussed in the same breath as Nobel laureates. But there was one thing Tukey never did. He never admitted to the killings. He maintained his innocence until the very end. He said he had repented for everything else, for founding the Crips, for the violence, and for the lives destroyed. But he would not confess to murders he said he did not commit. And that is what sealed it. Here is an irony you cannot make up. Arnold Schwarzenegger, the governor of California who would decide Tukey's fate, reportedly met Tukey in the 1970s at Venice Beach. Both men were bodybuilders, both were in that world, and now, decades later, one of them held the other's life in his hands. On December 8, 2005, Schwarzenegger held a clemency hearing behind closed doors. Both sides received 30 minutes. Tukey's supporters argued transformation: the books, the peace protocols, the Nobel nominations, a presidential award, 24 years of documented change. A man who had spent more time trying to undo the Crips than he ever spent building them. The prosecutors argued 4 dead people: Albert Owens, 26, Yen Ai Yang, 76, Tsai Shai Chen Yang, 63. Yi Chen Lin, 43. They played trial testimony of Tukey laughing and imitating the sounds of a dying man. They pointed out he had never apologized to the victims' families, never admitted guilt. On December 12, 2005, Schwarzenegger released a denial of 5 pages. Without an apology and atonement for these senseless and brutal killings, there can be no redemption. The United States Supreme Court rejected a final appeal. Tukey was told he would die after midnight. On his last night, he met with friends, talked on the phone, and read letters from supporters around the world. He refused a final meal. He drank only milk. He did not want a spiritual advisor, and he did not want the prison chaplain. He did change his mind about one thing. He decided to let 5 people he loved watch him die. Shortly after midnight on December 13, 2005, 16 days before his 52nd birthday, Stanley Tukey Williams walked into the execution chamber at San Quentin State Prison. A semi-octagonal room, a padded green gurney, pale white light. He lay down. Guards strapped him in. A guard placed his hand on Tukey's shoulder and kept it there, an attempt at comfort. And then something went wrong. The nurse tried to insert an IV into Tukey's left arm. She could not find a vein. His muscles were too massive. Decades of weightlifting starting from that juvenile hall gym when he was 15, she stuck the needle, drew blood accidentally, tried again, missed, and tried again. 12 minutes. The execution team spent 12 minutes trying to find a vein in the arm of a man they were about to kill. At one point, Tukey lifted his head off the gurney and looked at the nurse. Still can't find it? His 5 loved ones stood behind the glass. They mouthed, "God bless you." They mouthed, "We love you." They blew kisses. Barbara Becknell, his co-author and the woman who had helped him write those children's books, stared at him and prayed. Tukey tried to keep his head up as long as he could, to see them, to hold on to the faces of the people who loved him for as long as consciousness would allow. At 12:21 a.m., the sodium pentothal entered his bloodstream. Then pancuronium bromide to stop his breathing. Then potassium chloride to stop his heart. He kept his head up until the first drug took him under. At 12:35 a.m., Stanley Tukey Williams was pronounced dead. 36 minutes, from the moment he walked in alive to the moment they called it. Outside San Quentin, 1,000 people stood in the dark. A former Crip named Donald Archie, who went by Sweetback in the streets, now 51 years old, said that Tukey's body might lay down, but his spirit ain't going nowhere. Hours before the execution, in his final interview, Tukey said that his lack of fear of this barbaric methodology of death came from his faith. He said it had nothing to do with machismo, with manhood, or with some pseudo-former gang street code. He said this was pure faith and predicated on his redemption. His ashes were scattered in a lake in Thokoza Park in Soweto, South Africa. That was his final wish. Not Los Angeles, not South Central, not the streets that made him Africa. His funeral filled a church with 1,500 seats. 2,000 mourners came to see his body. Gang members and celebrities sat in the same pews. The 15-year-old who told a review board he'd lead the biggest gang in the world did exactly that. Then he spent 24 years trying to undo it. 5 Nobel nominations, 8 children's books, a peace protocol between the Crips and the Bloods, a letter from a president, a movie starring Jamie Foxx, and they still strapped him to a table. Because some things, once you build them, you can't take back. The Crips are still out there, 50,000 deep, in 42 states, wearing blue. And the man who started it all is ashes in Africa.